All right, part 4 of GI, because people keep calling my phone and knocking me off. All right, so your digestion, we're going to talk about chemical digestion, and that is on, digestion starts on 377 for the new book. It says mechanical digestion breaks ingested food into tiny particles, mixes them with digestive juices, moves them along the alimentary canal, and finally eliminates the digestive waste from the body. Chemical digestion breaks down large non-absorbable nutrient molecules into smaller absorbable nutrient molecules that are able to pass easily through the intestinal mucosa into the blood and lymph, so those nutrients can get out to other parts of my body where needed. The next slide is just a little picture that you've got in your book about how things are transferred. It says digestion and absorption of nutrients, minerals, and water. We'll come back to that. Actually, there's not a whole lot that you need to know there, but you can see that it's like the inside up at the top is what's inside your intestines. So the things like the polysaccharides, the proteins, the fats, the water, and the minerals, those are all inside your intestines, and it shows how they go through the intestinal wall during, whether it be active transport for ions. Remember, ions need some kind of energy to transport, or osmosis or diffusion or secretion. It shows all of the ways that those things pass through the intestinal wall to get where they need to go, either to in the bloodstream or the lymph system. Okay. You don't need to memorize either, any of those, how they get there, but water would go through osmosis, because we know that that's how water travels, and it would go to, blood would be absorbed through the intestinal wall and go to your bloodstream to eventually be filtered out. Polysaccharides, which are sugars, get broken down, and by ways of active transport and diffusion will eventually make it to your bloodstream, so they can eventually be passed through your body and be disposed of. Proteins, the same way, and fats works by secretion, but you don't really need to know those individual ways, but that just shows you how they pass over the intestinal wall and get to where they need to go, either to your bloodstream or your lymph system. Digestion, enzymes, and chemical digestion. Enzymes are protein molecules that act as catalysts. Remember, enzymes elicit a response. They make something happen, and they're like adding the fuel to the fire. That is, they speed up specific chemical reactions without themselves being changed or consumed during the reaction. During chemical digestion, certain enzymes very selectively speed up the breakdown of specific nutrient molecules and no others. Enzymes responsible for speeding up the breakdown of lipids, for example, have no effect on the carbohydrates or proteins. They're very specific to what they're supposed to break down. The breakdown process, called hydrolysis, is an important time of chemical reaction that we talked about back in chapter 2. Recall, during hydrolysis, enzymes speed up reactions that add water to chemically break up or split larger molecules. Remember, to split that up means to break it apart, means to lysis. So in hydrolysis, all we're doing is breaking up big molecules by pushing them full of water, or hydro, pushing them through, pushing water into that bigger particle to break it up by the water going inside of the molecule and forcing it apart. Next, we've got chemical digestion, a very, very great little diagram here. These are the chemicals that we use in each area of the alimentary system to help break down the large molecules. In the saliva, we have salivary amylase. In your gastric juices, we have pepsin. In the pancreatic juice, we have protease and lipases and pancreatic amylase. The intestinal enzymes, we have peptidase, sucrase, lactase, and maltase. These are all different enzymes, very specific areas that help to break down. You do not have to memorize this slide. I will not ask these questions, but I do want you to know that each area have different kind of secretions, different kinds of chemicals, I should say, that are very specific to that one area that help break down the food, and so nutrients can be broken up and be passed off to the various parts of the body. Carbohydrate digestion is below in your book. It says very little digestion of carbohydrates occurs before they reach the small intestines. Salivary amylase usually has little time to do its work because so many of us have to swallow our food so fast. Some of us don't even chew it up all the way. So gastric juice contains no carbohydrate digesting enzymes. So that means that we've chewed so fast and we swallow, we don't hold it in our mouth. So the salivary amylase doesn't really start to break down the carbs. And there's nothing to break down the carbs in your stomach. So the breakdown of carbs starts in my small intestines. After carbohydrates reach the small intestines, pancreatic and intestinal juices, enzymes digest the starches and double sugars. A pancreatic enzyme called pancreatic amylase starts the process by breaking down polysaccharides, such as starches, into disaccharides, double sugars. 3 intestinal enzymes, maltase, sucrase, and lactase, digest disaccharides by changing them into monosaccharides, which is a simple sugar. Remember, mono means one. So all we're doing is taking complex carbohydrates and breaking them down to the simplest form. Maltase digests maltose, which digests sucrose and lactose and digests, you know what, you don't need any of that, all right? None of the oses. You don't need to remember any of that right now. I do want you to remember, however, where carbohydrate digestion takes place. That one is important. And you need to remember that it's with the help of pancreatic enzymes. Remember, because we said earlier that some people don't have those pancreatic enzymes. When it comes to the maltose, sucrose, and lactose, the maltase, sucrase, and lactase, what they were before they got broken down, you don't need to worry about that right now. That's nothing that we need. It does talk about lactose intolerance, though. And it says many adults and some children produce a low amount of lactase and therefore have the difficulty digesting lactose, which comes from milk. So that makes you lactose intolerant. So if you cannot digest lactase because you're missing one of those enzymes, whether it be, well, in this situation it would be lactase. But if you're missing that enzyme, then you cannot break down lactose and you are lactose intolerant. Okay. So let's see here, we could go on. So just to sum up right there, maltase digests maltose, sucrase digests sucrose, and then lactase digests lactose. But again, you don't have to remember those. So just to make that clear about lactose intolerance, if my body's missing lactase, then I can't break down the lactose and I'll have lactose intolerance. Protein digestion starts in the stomach. Hydrochloric acid in gastric juice helps to unfold large complex proteins. Pepsinogen is a protein in the gastric juice. It's converted into the active pepsin enzyme by hydrochloric acid. Pepsin then begins breaking down peptide bonds to form shorter and shorter chains of amino acids. Just like in carbohydrate digestion, we're taking large molecules in this situation of protein and then making them smaller and smaller and smaller molecules. In the intestines, other enzymes, trypsin and pancreatic juice pepsidase, or intestinal juice, finish the job at the protein digestion. Now, what I want you to remember for protein digestion, that it occurs, starts in the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, and that protein molecules are broken down from large molecules into smaller ones. It would be horrible to try to remember all these enzymes for all these different places. Again, just the basic process is what you need. Fat digestion, also known as lipids. Just as carbohydrates, very little fat and oil digest occurs before they reach the small intestine. Most lipids are undigested until after being emulsified into tiny droplets by bile in the duodenum. So we don't start the process until it gets to the small intestine, really. After the lipids are trapped inside tiny droplets, pancreatic lipase splits them into their components, triglycerides, and other large lipid molecules, and they're thus broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, the end product of fat digestion, and then I will expel them. So again, just taking very large pieces of fat, breaking them down smaller and smaller until they can be excreted in the feces. Absorption, actually it doesn't talk about the end product. Let's see here. It doesn't talk about the end product of digestion. I think we all know what that is, right? All right. Absorption, the mechanisms of absorption is on page 379. We talked about this picture, figure 1616, the one that talks about osmosis and diffusion and all those things. We talked about that a little bit earlier, But that just shows you ways that things are absorbed into your system. All right, let me get back up to the slide. It says nutrient absorption is the process by which digested foods move from the intestines into the blood or the lymph. And that's all you really need to know about that slide. It says food and most water, minerals, and vitamins are absorbed from the small intestine. Some water and vitamin K also absorbed from the large intestine. So that is the key thing to remember. Most of my nutrient absorption comes from my small intestines. I don't absorb things in my gut. It's in the small intestines that my intestines start to take those nutrients out of everything that came out of my stomach. Okay, I swallowed, I chewed, I swallowed. It went down my esophagus, hit my stomach. In my stomach, it mixed with hydrochloric acid, churned it up. Okay, turned it all up with those hard muscles of my stomach, made this thing called chyme or chyme, however you say it. And then it goes off into my small intestine. And my small intestine's job is to pull the nutrients out of what everything just happened in my stomach, to pull the nutrients out so they can go to either my blood system to be used by my tissues or somewhere else, or to my lymph to be stored or used for immunity for some reason. Okay, so when you're looking at this figure and we're looking at how water is absorbed, we know it's by osmosis because that's how water moves. And we can see that the different areas, the protein starts with active transport and actually diffuses through the intestinal wall. These are just ways that different things that I ingest actually get absorbed into either my bloodstream or to my lymph system. So I think really just looking at this figure can sum it up for absorption for us. I also want you to make sure that you remember that vitamin K and water can be absorbed by the large intestines. And that's why the longer it sits in the large intestines, the harder your stool gets, because it keeps absorbing water and more water. But really look at this when you're thinking about absorption. All you're really thinking about is how each of these things that I ingest and then digest actually go to my small intestine, and how it passes through the wall of my small intestine to either get to the blood or to the lymph. The next page is absorption continued. It talks about the surface area and the fractal geometry. That's something that we're not going to cover. You don't need that right now, so we're just going to skip slide 50. I'm actually going to probably take 50 out, but if you get there and you see absorption and surface area and fractal geometry, you don't really need that. Okay, and then terms to know is at the end, and then we have questions and we're done. So you ended up with 4 different videos for this one because I kept getting cut off. So that is GI in a nutshell.